Good morning. Today's topic is another subtle yet not commonly discussed theme about handstands, and I want to talk a little bit about asymmetry. So, most people, when they learn their handstands, they don't always have this straight line vertically. A lot of times they lean to one side or they have this twist in their body, and it's not something they do consciously, and there are a lot of reasons behind it. So, I want to go into the potentials for those reasons and possible techniques on how to be aware and overcome them. As always, none of this is universal. Take it with a grain of salt. It's just my experience. And it's, again, another topic that I just don't see a lot of people talk about, so I really would like to discuss it. So asymmetry in the handstand, think about if you stand. Usually you're symmetrical, but a lot of people put their hip out to one side, and there are a lot of reasons behind this. So one, you have to understand whether it's a physical asymmetry that causes that. So in the handstand, for example, if you have one arm longer than the other, that could be an issue, and that's something where either you're going to have to tilt or modify your technique in another way, because we can't really make one arm shorter without surgery. But then what's more common is sometimes one side is maybe tighter than another in terms of flexibility. Maybe one wrist. I know for me, because I've had some injuries on this left wrist, I have a little bit less flexibility on my left compared to my right. So that's something that can cause issues. Sometimes it's some kind of twist or asymmetry in the back. So these are issues that are physical, but they can be fixed, right? And then the third issue is sometimes it's perspective. A lot of the reason that people are asymmetrical without knowing it is that they don't actually have a point of reference for what the symmetry is, so that when they feel they are in their straight position, they're actually off to one side, and they haven't developed enough awareness outside of what that straight position is in order to be able to correct it. So first step towards correcting asymmetry is just knowledge and awareness, just understanding that you may not be completely straight up and down. And it's a good idea here to take some photos, take some video. Always, if you can, get feedback from a coach who knows what they're doing, because that's going to be the most valuable thing you can do. But just understanding that you are, and then start to analyze a little bit. Okay, which side do I lean to? Now, where is the lean coming from? Because more often than not, the shoulders are a culprit. Because if one arm is a little bit higher, if maybe if the head is closer to one side compared to another, that's going to make it look like the legs are tilting, but the shoulders have I think the biggest potential for causing a lot of these asymmetries. But do some analysis. So figure out, is your back straight? Do you lean to one side? Are your shoulders uneven? Maybe you have uneven extension of the elbows, and that causes an arm length difference. Test your flexibility on both sides. Make sure that there's no lateral flexion of the spine. Sometimes the hips could also rotate, so that's why you want to take photos from different angles, because you may not always see this rotation from a front view, but then from the side you can look, okay, my hips are actually piked and rotated. So hip flexibility, in terms of a straight handstand, it won't have as much impact, but it still could if you're tighter on one hip than another. Just start to analyze and start to look at potentials of why are you crooked, what's causing it physically, and not just the outcome, but also the source of what's making you crooked. And again, if you're not used to seeing a lot of handstands, this may not be an easy thing to figure out or correct by yourself. It's very difficult to coach yourself, so I always recommend going to a gymnastics coach, or maybe a hand balancing coach, somebody who knows what they're looking at. And it doesn't have to be me. It can be a lot of qualified people that know what they're doing, but they will give you advice on things that maybe you can't see in your own practice for yourself. Past injuries is another really common thing to look at, because I talk about this a lot. When you get injured, the body gets really clever at avoiding the injury, which for the healing process and getting back into the original form, I think it's really important. But the problem is that when this new pattern starts to become the habit after the injury is healed. So really common one, this is something that I've gone through this year, so I can say personally. So I injured this left wrist, and then getting back into doing handstands, I developed a lean to my right side, but it wasn't that simple. I had to actually experiment and go through a number of corrections till I found it was even, because what happened was my head would go to one side, then my legs would go to another side, and then I had also a slight hip of the twist, all from one simple wrist injury. Of course, there are other things that are compounding, like I have maybe different flexibility on my shoulders some days. I have my right arm as dominant, so it's a bit stronger than the left, and that's not even accounting for the injury. I have uneven elbow extension slightly, so that makes a difference as well. So it's the wrist injury that caused these three different compensations, but you have to understand that it's a complicated system. Basically, assess yourself. If you had past injuries that could be potentially affecting your handstand, wrist, shoulder, elbow are going to be the big ones. And the basic thing to look out for is if you had this previous injury on one of your sides, the body may have a tendency to lean to the other side. And try to figure out if it's that or if it's just dominance. Like you're stronger on one side, so you might develop a natural lean to that side. Just understanding where it comes from. And it's a process, it takes time, but part of that process is learning this detailed self-awareness. Next, we get into how to correct the asymmetry. That's going to be the hardest part. It's going to be much harder to do by yourself. So I'm going to give you kind of categories. Number one category is go to a coach, get a coach. They're going to correct you hands-on, and then you can feel the difference between one position and the other. That's the best thing you can do, because this is the really important thing and why it's so hard to fix the asymmetry, but we're going to do exercises that lead into it, is it's perception, and you may not have the perspective of point of reference of what straight is if you think that crooked is straight. That's a really important idea. If I learn to stand like this, and this is the only way I learn to stand, and that's all I know, I think that it's vertical. So if you put me here, which is actually straight, to me it feels like I'm over here because I haven't developed the point of reference and the awareness to be on both sides. So the hands-on corrections with the coach are most important, and then the idea is to remember what those corrections feel like so you can do them yourself. Not just the final position, but also the movement of how to correct into the final position. Second variation of this, if you don't have access to a coach, because I know a lot of people don't, video yourself and make those corrections in real time. So think, okay, in the video, I'm going to think about moving my shoulders this way to see if that corrects it. And then later you watch the video and you see if the movement that you were trying to make, what you thought was happening, was actually happening in the video. And then it's a little bit slower process than getting corrected, but it's a way that you can start to understand, okay, this is what I think is happening in my body, this is what's really happening, and then you can tweak until you learn to refine those corrections. And then the third method, I'll show you the practical demonstration. This is my favorite. This is the idea of actually learning to move outside of center, and you can use that as a calibration towards understanding if you're crooked or not. And eventually you'll get this very fine, detailed awareness, and you'll feel if you're crooked or not, and you'll know how to correct it. But these exercises, so basically if I stand only like this, I don't have a point of reference, I don't have perspective, I don't know what vertical is. So I learned to stand like this, like this, like this, all of these different ways. And then when I learned to move outside of center, and I learned to twist and to push my hips out to one side and forward, I have a much better perspective of what that central position is. So it's something that we can do in a handstand. It's a bit more complex in a handstand, so I would say if you're really playing around with these movements, make sure you have developed and accumulated a bit of time in your base handstand, at least on the wall, just so you have enough awareness in the central position so you know what to come back to. But I'm going to show you a few of the things that I do. I use this in my warm-up. Sometimes I just use them as warm-up conditioning coordination drills, but sometimes I'll use them actually to calibrate if I'm going to one side or not. So basically here's the theoretical idea of, let's say I'm stronger in my right arm and I'm recovering from a wrist injury on my left. So the basic tendency is that I'll lean a little bit more weight to the right arm to make it easier on the left. So if I learn how to move from side to side, I can move left and right. And then when I move to the left, it's going to feel like it's more distance. It's going to feel like it's further to put all the weight on the left arm than to the right arm, and then knowing how much gap there is, I know how much I'm leaning to the right arm, and then I have enough data to make that correction. So this is like a basic protocol. I'll show you what that looks like in practice. Okay, apologies for the background noise. I have to deal with these neighbors, landscapers. So this is what it's going to look like. And like I said, this is a good warm-up, good coordination exercises. You can do these freestanding, and I do. But I'm showing you on the wall because realistically, if you don't have a solid freestanding handstand yet, this is going to make it much, much, much more complicated. So against the wall, I don't have to worry about balance. Hopefully I'm in frame, try not to knock anything over, and I'm not warmed up right now. So if I feel that I go a little bit like this to the right side, I'm going to do just very basic, and right now I can feel it. It takes a little bit more effort to go left than to go right. So I'm going to do a few of these calibrations, and then I can find a better center line. I can play with pushing one shoulder, pushing the other shoulder. Twisting is another one, so I learn what it feels like to twist from my hips. I can do these correctional alignments, forwards and backwards to feel the shoulder, circles. And then I can find a little bit of a straighter line after I do this. And if I don't, I can reset, but the idea is I'm using these sideways and twisting movements to calibrate. Okay, do you know what's funny? I'm pretty sure the landscapers only come when I'm trying to film a video and I'm trying to not have any background noise, but it's okay, it doesn't matter. I'll show you the same thing with the back to the wall. Again, just reiterating what I've said. Learn a solid handstand first, but then moving outside of it is really good for calibrating and learning how to make all of these corrections so you can find what your center in your handstand is better. So, back to the wall, same idea. So maybe I'm leaning a little bit to the right, so I do these side to side motions, twisting the hips. I can pike and straighten the hips. I can arch my back and then flatten my back. I can change my head position. I can play with pushing out more. Maybe that helps a lot of people who are too sunken in their handstand. I can bend one elbow, I can bend the other, and I can experiment with what all of these different movements do in relation to my handstand. And again, we have this idea that the handstand is this and it's a stick, but you know, human body is complicated. And we have to be aware of all of these joints and all of the potential movements or restrictions that we have. Okay, so as I said, the best thing you can do is go to a workshop, go to a class, take a lesson with somebody, and they can correct you in person, and you can understand precisely what your issues are. Hopefully this clarified a little bit another subtle detail, so I'm not trying to do top 3 handstand mistakes that all these other fucking channels doing. I'm trying to discuss the subtle details that are not talked about in all of these clickbait videos. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's clarified a couple issues for you. Don't forget to check my website for upcoming workshops and seminars to learn from me in person. Check out my Vimeo page for some tutorial instructional videos that are very detailed. Let me know what else you'd like to see. Follow me on social media, all this promotional bullshit, and I'll see you next time I do one of these.